Hey everybody, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. So in today's video, I wanted to share with you a little bit of a kind of secret trick or tip or perhaps thing that I realized I've learned along my journeys with psychedelics, that if perhaps you're new to using psychedelics and you tend to struggle with a bit of stress, anxiety, kind of ruminating on your issues, or kind of getting caught up in overthinking about your own kind of psychology when you're on psychedelics, this might be a useful little tip I'm about to provide to you. So if that interests you, watch on. Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're doing well out there. So there's an entire set of discussions that I have not yet shared on this channel. There's a huge kind of subset of discussions to have around the topic of these different models of the layers of the self, right? So if you get into kind of the history of psychedelics and different ways of thinking about how to use psychedelics, how to use psychology, different kind of schools of personal development work, you'll almost inevitably bump up against these different models, whether that would be like Timothy Leary's kind of 8-layer model of self, whether this is chakra theory, whether this is spiral dynamics. There are these multiple models of different layers to our experience of being a human being. That, in other words, we kind of simultaneously exist on these different levels of our being. And so why am I bringing this up here? I was recently using a bit of a microdosing session for myself here, and I realized that I have a natural understanding of different ways I can go with my attention that I think a lot of people who are new into psychedelics perhaps don't understand is possible, or don't understand what that might look like for them, that I thought I'd want to share here with you. Because if we kind of only end up in the same place, and that place happens to be kind of a neurotic hyper processing of our issues, or kind of obsessive looking inward at our own psychology, that can sometimes be overwhelming, less useful. It can be a place where we can kind of get stuck in loops of thinking and kind of stressed out and just kind of hooked into an ongoing, perhaps never ending self-inquiry process that might kind of at the surface seem like the thing to do, or might seem fruitful initially. But over time, it starts to become clear that you're really just kind of, thinking in loops and kind of rehashing the same old stuff. And that, it might be nice to be able to move your attention in a way that sets you into a place of a bit more well-being, freedom, peace, tranquility, or gives you perhaps a bit more perspective on all the stuff that you're processing in terms of your psychology. So that's what I want to talk about today in this video. I do want to keep it brief here and not really expand on this too much. But I probably, will be doing more videos about this topic in the future. So if this resonates for you, please do me a favor. And before we get into it here, give a thumbs up to the video if you like this kind of content. Do consider subscribing to the channel if you like this kind of content, if you're interested in this intersection of psychology and healing and psychedelics and how all these fit together. And if anything resonates, please interact with the channel. Let me know if this lands for you, so that I know to make more of this content. So without further ado, let me explain a little bit about the problem, and then how to kind of move your attention to kind of shift into different relationships to the problem. Okay, so regular viewers of the channel may recall that I recently did a video, which I will try to, leave a card for above here, which is essentially this idea of the problem of the middle, of being kind of stuck in the middle between either extremes of working through things and actually transforming things. That a lot of times this kind of middle ground is where a lot of the suffering actually is, and a lot of the stuckness is, right? And so that was in a slightly different context, but this same general idea of kind of the middle zone between two extremes being where we tend to suffer the most applies here in the video I'm about to share with you. So the problem, that I'm trying to kind of help you deal with here is one of perhaps rumination. One of perhaps you take a microdose, or you take a macrodose of psychedelics, and you end up overthinking about your issues. You end up really trying to problem solve and get to the root of figuring out what it is. You kind of get stuck in your head trying to figure out, why am I this way? What's going on with me? There's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of kind of neurotic processing, a lot of ruminating on why do I have depression? Why do I have anxiety? What is my fear? What is my issue? What's the root of this? What's the event that caused this to happen? And kind of a fixation on the problem that kind of keeps us stressed, stuck, kind of enmeshed and hooked in and engaged with overthinking about the issue. Now, I do think it's important to say that non-avoidance is a really key kind of principle of healing and transformation work. I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes insights can be really helpful. And sometimes when we stop and we reflect on stuff, it can be really, really useful and really, really healing. So I don't want to negate that. Okay. I'm not trying to say don't ever do that. If it's useful, absolutely do that. If it's helping you, if you're actually going somewhere that's leading to a breakthrough, great. But sometimes we kind of accidentally program ourselves, if we're using psychedelics for therapeutic purposes, to associate psychedelics with therapeutic type processing. And often, we do this at the same time that we don't actually really understand really clearly what therapeutic processing is and looks like or how to do it. And so we're kind of pairing our kind of stereotype or our projection or our imagined version of what therapeutic processing is, which is something like ruminating, with being on psychedelics, right? So for a lot of us, this is the time where we go into problem-solving mode or fixing mode or figuring out mode, right? And again, the problem is that eventually you start to condition yourself to having this experience where every time you take psychedelics, you're kind of just fixating on problems. And that can kind of, not always lead to perhaps these expansive states that you read about or hear about, or kind of the joy or the well-being or the sense of connection to life, or just more broadly, pivoting your awareness to other domains of your own being or of your own experience in life in general. So there is a way we can move our attention here that really helps us to kind of open up this whole thing and have access to different states that I think are really useful. So resource states is what I'm talking about here. So, things like deep, profound emotional openness or spiritual connection or connection to all of life or a sense of transcendence or connection to the bigger picture. These kinds of things that are classically known to be part of the psychedelic experience oftentimes are pretty absent if we are in this kind of neurotic processing mode. So how would you get there, right? Like, let's say you took a psychedelic and you had accidentally conditioned yourself to ruminate and over psychologize yourself, and you want to just have kind of a blissful experience. How do you move your attention? What do you do to shift that? So let's talk about some different ways that you can go here. So in case so far my setup in the conversation hasn't been clear, what I'm really trying to say here is that we have different layers and levels to our being, and that the mental layer is only one layer of our being. But if we're not self-aware about that, then we aren't necessarily realizing that we're stuck in the mental layer and that there are other options available to us. The other part of that is often it's the mental layer where a lot of that neurotic, stressful, anxious, ruminating, trying to figure it out, problem-solving kind of way of being is, right? So if we shift into a different layer or level of our being, then we can have an absolutely different experience of ourselves, our nervous system, the psychedelic that's in our nervous system, and of life in general, right? So that's really what I'm trying to convey here. So there are really, essentially, you can think of it as two extreme directions you can go in, either of which is going to help you shift your consciousness and shift into perhaps a safer, more comfortable, more expansive way of being, right? So you can kind of think of it perhaps as, zooming in and going deeper into the self and into the sub layers of the self at one polarity, or at the other end, expanding out beyond the sense of self into the transpersonal reality, the expansive kind of oneness of life, the experience of nature and of everything beyond you and outside of you, right? So let me explain a little bit about both of these. So if we go deeper into the self, A lot of times people assume that the deeper you go into yourself, what you're going to find is more and more dark, unknown, scary corners and heavy issues and traumas you've forgotten about and stuff that needs processing. In my experience, this isn't really true. As you start to tune more into your body, more into your internal, what's called interoception, so tracking your internal sensory experience, right? Paying attention to going from mind perhaps to emotions, so emotions being a little closer to physical, like a blending of mind and body is kind of where emotions live. Tracking emotions down into physical sensations in the body, tracking sensations down into that core experience of self or life force, however you want to think of that. This is what, in certain schools of therapy, we might call a core state. And when you get down to a core state, there is that kind of ineffable, wordless, transcendent, profoundly meaningful, blissful, open-hearted, chills moving through your body, feeling of perhaps peace, well-being, equanimity, compassion, love, joy, presence, embodiment, wordless kind of poetic profundity, something like that, right? It's really hard to put the ineffable into words by definition, right? But it's this embodied somatic sense of profound life force and energy and well-being that is at the root of your being. If you kind of double click, if you're zooming in and you're going into yourself, that's what you're going to find at a deeper layer of your being, right? So one way you can go, if you're kind of in your mind and ruminating, is down in your body, down into your senses, down into your felt sense, down into your somatic, down into interoception, into feeling, and to experience more of your life force. And generally, as you're experiencing more of your life force, you start to experience the raw quality of being alive, which is this kind of beauty and this awareness and this openness and this poetic, exquisite sense of well-being, right? So this is often a very useful way to go if you've never taken your attention that direction, because this skill of interoception, this skill of tracking what's going on a sensory level in the body is incredibly useful and important for therapy, for transformational work, for healing, for spiritual work too. But it's also really affirming to know that as you move outside of this kind of middle band of awareness and down more into the sensory, more into the embodied, what you experience isn't terror, overwhelm, fear, stress, but bliss, well-being, peace, health, life, kind of an embodied spiritual experience, right? So that's one way we can go. So obviously, since I'm talking about the two different directions you can go that kind of shift you out of this middle ground of kind of neurotic suffering, the other direction that you can go is really the expansive, kind of moving your awareness out beyond your sense of self, beyond your personal narrative, beyond your physical body, beyond the circumstances of your life, and allowing your attention to really expand outward to the world around you, to life as a whole, to the exquisite beauty of the elements of nature, to the exquisite beauty of the animals in the world around us, and all the goodness and all the amazing people that are doing amazing things around us that we tend to kind of ignore or filter out because we're so busy focusing on the stresses and worries and politics and, problems in the world. You can really allow your attention to expand out into the wholeness of whether that's, again, life, whether that's just the gift of this moment in your life, whether that's an expansion to the awareness of all your loved ones in your life that you're grateful for, whether that's a connection to, again, nature and the planet, or even beyond the planet out into the cosmos, out into kind of the larger wholeness of life, right? So generally speaking, as we kind of expand into this kind of more transpersonal awareness, we tend to feel profound kind of smallness, but connection to the whole that's deeply rewarding and beautiful. And again, transcendent, poetic, powerful, empowering, beautiful, but also can be poignant because we can also become aware of these larger issues in the world and that which is, kind of beyond our control, or, this kind of a thing. So it can be a bit of a double-edged sword to move in this direction, but generally, if you really go far out into the, sense of connectedness of all of life, again, this is where you tend to experience kind of mystical experiences for a lot of people, or this is the direction that they tend to first go as they're having a mystical experience. I would argue that ultimately a mystical experience is the fusion, is the interconnection of this broad transpersonal sense of self and this core state, at the depths of our being, and feeling the connection of those two things at the same time. But this is another way you can go towards expansion, towards, the universe, towards the cosmos. And for some of us, like, let's say, we're in a shitty situation, in a shitty set of circumstances, our life is hard, we're stressed, and going inward feels more triggering and more threatening than it does comforting. Sometimes this sense of expansion is often where we find a bit more well-being and comfort. So these are the two different directions you can be going that start to take you, again, out of that ruminating, over-psychologizing, over-problem-solving kind of mental layer of your being. So let me talk a little bit about how this is useful in terms of healing work, and then we'll kind of wrap the video. Okay, so now that you know that there's kind of this mental layer that we can get stuck in, and that you can kind of move your attention in either direction, deeper into your embodied experience and towards your life force and kind of a core state, or expanding beyond yourself to a transpersonal awareness, a sense of the interconnection of life. How do we use this in therapy? How do we use this in personal growth work or personal development work or transformational work? Well, here's what I would offer you is at least one way we could use this. There are probably many ways we could use this. But first of all, I think it's nice to know simply that you don't have to be stuck in this kind of mental layer of your being and kind of over-psychologize yourself and over-ruminate yourself into corners. This can be a classic place where people get stuck and suffer and get in confirmation bias loops and rationalization loops and just suffer kind of more. We can really dig ourselves in there. So I think simply knowing you can get outside of that if you need to creates a bit of a sense of safety, right? And knowing that you can go deeper into yourself or deeper beyond yourself, and either way is going to create a resource state for you, some sort of a positive, profound, beautiful experience. This then gives you a bit of a sense of safety of working with your own issues, right? Because now you can, if things get a little too hot here in the body and it's a little too much, I mean, there's an edge to ride there, right? But let's say things get too intense for me here. I know I can drop down into the experience of my life force and experience that at a more profound level, or I know I can expand outwards beyond my body, including my body, but also allowing my attention to move beyond it and use that kind of transcendent kind of perspective to give me a little bit more clarity or sense of safety while working with these kind of issues of mine and resolving them. So this becomes a really handy tool so that you're not, under-resourced and then confronted with, issues that part of the reason they're there and that you haven't resolved them is that probably they've felt unsurmountable, too big, too overwhelming, too challenging. In other words, you haven't had the resources to be able to deal with them in the past. But now you have this ability to move through this spectrum of attention from going kind of deeper inward or going further outward or kind of sitting yourself in the middle that empowers you to perhaps be a little more resourced to be able to do the work. And so I think this is a really important thing to understand that, again, I picked up a long time ago. It's one of these things I kind of do automatically that I had to kind of reverse engineer and kind of figure out what is it I understand here that maybe other people just don't even know to look for or realize is a possibility. So that's what I'm communicating here. So I'd love to know, is this useful? Is this helpful to you? Does this make sense? Is this clear? Leave me a comment down below. I'd really appreciate it just to know whether or not to talk more about the different layers of our being and see if this is useful for you. I personally think of this as like a core psychonaut tool that you're really going to want to understand if you're using psychedelics in any sort of transformational, spiritual, mental, psychological, personal growth capacity. In other words, if you're not just partying with these drugs and you're using them as a tool for personal growth in any sense of the term, This is something you're going to want to know. Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope this was clear, and do me a favor and leave a comment, or a like or a subscription or a thumbs up, and just let the algorithm know I'm here. Help me grow the content, or grow the channel here rather. And if this content is meaningful to you, please drop some sort of comment. Let me know that this resonated for you. All right, much love. Take care. I'll talk to you guys soon.